It's story time.
Hi, welcome to Story Time. I'm so glad you're here. I'm especially glad that you've taken the time to honor what is really an invitation for connection. And although I appreciate the connection that we have, you and me, the real opportunity for connection is about connecting with yourself. Now, we've been exploring citizenship, and the stories that I've been sharing have been really resonating in this category of belonging. I started the month of October in Storytime by talking a little bit about the Pledge of Allegiance and how that pledge to belonging was an example of a ritual, a communal ritual. And then last week, I talked about really the stages of belonging or fitting in, as the case may be, in the sense that by having access to something, we then await an invitation, whether it's an invitation we give ourselves or an invitation that comes from outside. And then finally, there's the true inclusion. Now, there's another I here that could come up, which is integration, and that's not really what I'm looking for, but it's the inclusion, in which case our contribution, even if it's just showing up, is appreciated and valued and enough. And what I wanted to talk about today is kind of a little bit of a sticky story, and that is this story of becoming as a way of belonging. And what I mean by that is that we often go through identity development stages. Now, we go through them as children and adolescents, and that's part of the rite of passage. But we go through them with any time we get clearer about what and who we are. And that clarity often first shows up in what we're not. In fact, the yogis have a word, a Sanskrit word, and a practice, neti, neti, not this, not that. This practice of neti, neti, not this, not that, is a cleaning house of sorts, of when we recognize that which is here is not belonging, does not fit anymore. Now, the reason I say that this is a bit of a touchy subject is because I see this identity development and this aggressive, not this, not this, particularly in adolescence and those who are claiming a new identity that perhaps leaves those around us a little bit in the dark or surprised by their proclamation. And what I mean by that is whether it's religious affiliation, ethnic association, maybe even gender identity or orientation with sexuality and our partners, that these kind of touchy subjects were often hidden in the sense that we assumed what we assumed and we thought we knew what we knew, both on the outside and on the inside. It's not until we become aware, which might be the precursor to the 3 stages of fitting in or belonging that I talked to last week. So maybe you can relate, but we're living through it right now. And my children being in their adolescent stage and combined with what has been COVID and the exclusion of belonging, right? We've all been sent home. There's a threshold of them being able to test limits, which is normal for adolescents, outside of the parameter of their parental or even their authority, such as teachers, view. But they haven't had that opportunity because of COVID, right? They've been excluded and secluded. Now, in a certain sense, their participation in a virtual world outside of my watchful eye or my collaborative participation is that kind of no man's land, for lack of a better word, that free space where they're not being monitored, right? They're not being supervised, and they can start to present themselves as they want. In other words, a gamer tag, right? So if you don't know this, I have a gamer tag. I'm not a big gamer, but it's something new. Exactly. It's something new that now new for me is in the last 5 years. So it's something new that I'm playing with as a result of my partner, my husband, and our children all being very serious video gamers. Now, we are also board gamers and puzzle gamers and those kinds of things. But do you want to know what my gamer tag is? It's not going to surprise you, right? It's a combination of my favorite roles. It's Dr. Yoga Mom, all squished together into one word. I know, it's brilliantly clever, right? But when my husband said to me, he's creating this profile on our system at home, he's like, so what's your gamer tag? And I'm like, what's wrong with my name? He's like, you don't want to use your name. That's, everyone knows who you are. And this is where it became cautionary. He's like, you don't always want everyone to know who you actually are. So this is an opportunity to present who you want to be in this alternative reality. But this is exactly the same thing that we do when we come of age, when we come of clarity in the sense of who we be. Not this, not this. So I didn't include that I was a daughter. I didn't include that I was a former dancer. I didn't include that I'm a sibling to 6 other people in my gamer tag, right? I chose a label that seemed to honor what I love and was comfortable in showing. One of my children, gamer tag is vengeful DM. She's a dungeon master, and vengeful apparently is part of her energy, right? She is looking for vengeance. I don't know if that's on the players or on the world. I don't really know, but she's embodied that persona by way of claiming it as her name. The other thing that's going on that kind of fits here is we have 2 daughters and a son. And the first daughter we named after Peter's favorite aunt. She is of Japanese birth, and so we named our daughter, being a blended child of Japanese and Irish and American heritage, with a Japanese first name. Now, Aunt Keiko had a sister named Yoko. We debated naming our second child Yoko, but being who I am and the age in which I grew up, I could only hear Yoko in relationship with Yoko Ono. And that seemed like a burden that I didn't want to lay on my kid. So we looked for an alternative, right? And eventually we came up with Yumiko, right? Yumiko. These are 3 characters in Japanese character writing, kanji, in which case the yu means brave, the mi means beautiful, and the ko means dutiful daughter. Lo and behold, here's another true story of identity. I chose these names because I wanted to empower my children, particularly my girls, my daughters, to know that they were more than perhaps the feminine expectation that I kind of grew up in. Little did I know that Keiko, although the spelling we chose for K-E-Ko, also a 3-part syllable in the Japanese translation, the characters that we chose translate roughly to a love bug or firefly, which just seems so enduring. But what I learned later is that essentially Keiko is the Japanese equivalent to the American named Bambi or Buffy or something kind of lightheaded, ditzy, and airy, and a little bit diminutive in the mental scope. So here's my point, right? How does all these stories fit together? Is that this middle child who I avoided naming Yoko is now calling herself at school, and on her formal documents, she's calling herself Yoko. I think that's as not only a nod to her ancestry, her culture, but she already had a Japanese name, but now she's aligned with Peter's grandma as well, right? This name, this embodiment. So what we often have to do is turn away from what is not us. And at first, that felt like a bit of a rejection to me as the mom, that she's not using the name that I so painstakingly chose for her, intentionally chose for her. And yet, this took me a while, I'm still in process, it's not about me. What? It's not about me. It's about her identity development. She's not rejecting me as the loving mother and parent and caretaker that I am and have been and will continue to be for her, even though it kind of feels like it. My point is that in identity declaration, right, we can declare it by way of knowing what is and is not us. Now, sometimes when we cope with this shift, this alignment, restoration, or recalibration, we might come off a little more aggressive, in which case anything that is not this, neti neti, we become aggressively against. We stand our ground and we deny that anything else exists, right? And in some ways, that is the practice of a dead name in our transitioning gender identity population. We honor their intention of letting go of who they were in order to embrace who they are. But many in the transgender community, many in any community, I myself started using my full name, Kimberlyn, when I started to write and publish for my high school and local paper. It was only then that I felt I wanted to have a little more me in that documentation, as opposed to just Kim. Now, that's not a knock at anyone who prefers to be called Kim, but my problem was that when I used Kim, people assumed my name was Kimberly, and that assumption felt dishonest to me. So by using my full name, I eliminated the risk of being assumed and therefore inappropriately called Kimberly. Now, what happens when we reject the brand or the label or the identity that's been given to us? We can often be seen as a troublemaker, as someone who's just willfully obstinate. But we can also then defend or get overly aggressive, in which case we actually do get aggressive. We harm that which is not us. We see it as an us-them scenario. This is the black-white, this is the all or nothing, this is the yes and no mentality. And the way to get beyond that is to recognize that it's not about compensating for what we were doing, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about what that compensation is like next week when I talk about the imposter syndrome and fake it until you make it component of belonging. But it's also not necessary to convince or to prove to anyone else that we are who we say we are. And this is a bit of a trap, that if I have to wait for you to tell me who I am, I've given up my own power. Identity development is about claiming our power. It's about, I am Dr. Yoga Mom when I'm online. I am Coach Kimberlyn when I'm in my studio, right? Whatever those roles might be, in the sense that for me, the last 8 to 10 years has been integrating those roles to find the commonality. But that's not to say that there was not some struggle and some loss along the way. As I got clearer and clearer about who I am, not just who I wanted to be, but who I am authentically, there were some roles and even some relationships in my life that no longer fit, like a puzzle piece coming together. They didn't belong. And there was a real grieving and mourning process when I came to recognize that this isn't a fit. It doesn't devalue the person, particularly the relationship, or even the history that we shared. It just says we need to make room for our own becoming, which honestly also makes room for their becoming. We might reject it, like a bad breakup or a divorce, right? Also an opportunity for reclaiming our identity. But the root problem here is if we don't have a clarity of who we want to be, and all we do is avoid what we don't want, it's going to extend that both responsibility and burden on the outside world to define who we are. Whereas when we can own our own alignment, when we can be who we be, listen to all of the voices that embody our being, our heart, our belly, our brain, our body, when we can hear that witness, we can stand in that truth and live in alignment. And living in alignment is about being open to inspiration and allowing what doesn't fit to just pass on by. Doesn't mean that that goes away, right? It just means I don't need to give it any more attention. But more on that next week, in the sense of how do we not get attached to what doesn't fit? How do we move on from imposter syndrome and this kind of take it or fake it until you make it concept? So notice if there's any stages in your life right now that feel like there's some friction, some rubbing up against between who you were and who you feel you are called to be, you are wanting to be, this is where I breathe best. That is an area for opportunity and growth. And that growth comes when we can get to a point of standing in our knowingness. Even if that knowingness is, I don't know, at least I know that I don't know. Kind of like, I don't want to, but I want to. This is the evolution of getting clearer. So when we get clear about what we do know and what we don't know, we declare that compassionately for others to bear witness, and then we can start to process that transparency of our alignment within the community. It is only this place where we are clarifying and declaring, not compensating or trying to convince others, where we can truly grow in clarity, in compassion for ourselves, and cultivate authentic relationships with others around us. So that's my story for today. I'd love to hear how it relates to your story of becoming and belonging and being your best self. Take care. I look forward to seeing you and hearing your stories so we can continue this vulnerability circle of sharing. Be well. Namaste.